When we refer to the Exodus generation, we're talking about that generation that in Egypt cried out to God. And they said, God, save us from this situation that we're in. This is a desperate place, and we are being oppressed. And God hears them, and he uses the word, he visited them. And he saw their oppression, and he brought these plagues upon the people of Egypt. From the plagues, the final one being the death of the firstborn, and all of Egypt, brings them out, brings them to the Red Sea, at which point they cry out to God, or really to Moses and Aaron, but they cry out to God, and they say, how are we going to get through this? And God causes the waters to spread, and they go across on dry land, and then the waters come back over the Egyptian army that is following them, and they have a great victory. And then following this, God leads them out into the wilderness, so that starting in Exodus chapter 15, we get through what's often referred to as the testing narratives, where this group of people who have been miraculously saved already multiple times, they come out of Egypt and they're on their way to the holy mountain where God is going to actually appear to them. But before they get there, these testing narratives in chapters 15, 16, 17, all of these set them up, or really help them to see just what kind of people they are in regards to their relationship to God and what kind of faith they hold. This morning I want to look at the first of these testing narratives where God led his thirsty people to a body of water only to cause great concern and consternation. This morning I want to look at what happened at the waters of Marah. Good morning. It's good to be here this morning, isn't it? It's good to see everybody, to have this opportunity to be together, to know that there are folks who are online, who are joining with us as well in the Spirit, to have all of us knowing that we are worshiping God together. That worshiping God's important enough, that you got a bunch of folks who are coming together to do it, and not just here. We know folks all the way around the world are joining together this morning as we are worshiping God. Tell you what, that's a pretty special feeling, isn't it? To know we're not alone, to know that our love for God is something that binds us together, people all over the world. And I tell you what, it's good to be here, to be with you, to be a part of this group as we very specifically are doing that this morning together. I appreciate everybody who is here, particularly those who are visiting with us. We're really glad that you're here this morning, and hope that we all can be encouraged this morning. Is there no...
May I see your microphone, please?
It's got an amber light. What does that mean? I don't even know.
It means you're muted.
Yeah, okay.
Is that better?
That should be better. I'm not sure why we keep having mic problems. This is interesting. Something's wrong with the system here. We'll get it figured out. I know it was green when he handed it to me, so the error is on me somewhere. All right. Anyway, I said a bunch of stuff. Hopefully you heard at least some of it. One of the most important things, though, is I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that we are here together. And I hope we will be encouraged today by the time that we spend together, especially as we are now going to look at a part of Scripture that should be encouraging, but for some reason, it just is full of a whole lot of failure. As we begin to look at these testing narratives, that is, as Israel is first going into the wilderness on their way to Sinai. Now, the first testing narrative, Exodus chapter 15, we're going to start here in verse 22. Moses led Israel from the Red Sea. They went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness, and they found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, "What are we going to drink?" Now again, we are on the heels. We are following the great victory that occurred at the Red Sea. And then God has led them out here. God is now back in front of them. He is now leading them. And it's almost ironic to some degree that the problem at the Red Sea is there was too much water, right? And they had to get through. And now God is leading them to a place where there's not enough water. And so now you have the other side of the testing, and they've got nothing there. They go for 3 days. I'm sure they're rationing what they have. Remember, it's not just the people, which, by the way, if you take the numbers and you extrapolate them out, probably over 1 million people. It's a lot of folks to be on this move. So whatever water rations that they have, those are getting close probably to being depleted. And as they're coming up, they're kind of wondering, what are we going to do? We come out here, we don't have anything to drink. So God leads them finally to a place where there is water. And consider the elation that must have been felt at this point. They're kind of rationing what they have. They see water ahead, and the people in the front are getting excited, and then all the emotion is kind of making its way through the column, going all the way to the back. There's water, it's just ahead. We can see the water. Maybe people are, taking the last of their water rations and giving it to their animals, drinking it themselves. They know that they've got water coming, so finally they can drink to their fill. They empty everything that they have. They come up to this place where they finally have water. Here it is. They're approaching this oasis of sorts, and then they get to the water, and you can't drink it. It's not useful water. Here they've used up all their rations, everything that they have, and the water is bitter. It's undrinkable. You can probably remember this Exodus generation, and there's a certain phenomenon that if I were to play a word association game with you and I said Exodus generation, what word might you say back to me? Maybe the word grumbling, because that's one of the words that's most associated with this group of people. And that's the word that you find right here. They grumbled at Moses and they said, well, what are we going to do now? Thanks a lot, Moses. You led us out to this place. We got no water. It's been 3 days without water. And now here we are at this place, and we've got nothing. What are we going to do? They grumbled at Moses, saying, what shall we drink? Interestingly enough, this is the first time that this word is used. Now, these people have complained before. They complained in Egypt. Not only did they complain about their situation in Egypt, but when things didn't go well, they complained to Moses and said, great, thanks a lot, Moses. You messed us all up. Now we smell bad in Pharaoh's nostrils is kind of the way. But, basically said, now Pharaoh hates us even more. And that's a grumbling of sorts. But this is the first time this word actually gets used. This is the point in the testing, the first of the testing narratives. This is the point that they grumbled. And it's here, after being miraculously freed from Egypt, after having walked across a body of water on dry ground, it's here, after they've seen God's deliverance, that they say, what are we going to do now? And so moving forward, in verse 25, Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. So he threw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. There he made for them a statute and regulations, and there he tested them. He said, if you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments, keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer. So Moses does what Moses does when the people cry out to him. He cries out to God. And you would think that the people could just simply cry out to God, avoid the middleman, but this is the way that it typically runs. They go to Moses and Aaron, they cry out, and God, he says, okay, here's a tree. Take this tree, throw it in the water. Now, there is some debate, some discussion on exactly what happened and how this happened or whatever the case is. Some suggest that this is a tree that actually could do this, that there are those trees out there or whatever the case. Others say that, no, this is a miracle that's taking place. I tend to lean towards that. I think this is miraculous because everything that we've seen so far from God throughout Exodus is miraculous. He is very clearly showing his power. But whatever the case, the point is not simply are the waters made usable. And I hope that you see that. It's not just that they're led to this place and there aren't usable waters and then God makes the waters usable again. This was a test. Very specifically, they are here to see that God is their deliverer. You know, the structure that's here is very much like what you see in pattern in some of the signs that you have in the Gospel of John. Now, we haven't delved into this aspect very much. I think we've kind of maybe mentioned it because you see it tends more towards the later signs in John. But you remember when Jesus fed the 5,000, I am the bread of life, right? The miraculous sign points to something, an I am statement of Jesus. So when he feeds the 5,000 with bread, he then says, I am the bread of life. We'll probably talk about this, I'm assuming this evening, and get into it as we're going through the signs of John. But remember when he opened the eyes of the man who was born blind, he says, I am the light of the world. That this sign says something about an I am statement. And we're going to see when we look at the next one, in fact, the one that Kevin brought up in the Lord's Supper discussion earlier, when Lazarus is raised from the dead, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. These signs point to something with an I am statement. Well, that's what we have going on right here. As these waters are healed, God says, I, the Lord, am your healer. And so this is a sign. It's significant. It's demonstrating something. It's not just accidental that they end up right here and then God says, oh, okay, we'll take this stick and throw it in there. He is signifying something by doing this. There is a very purposeful demonstration. Why does God make this statement? Why does God bring them to this place? Why do they need to see that God is a healer? Well, consider again, what has this Exodus generation seen of God so far? They've seen God come in judgment. He came in judgment with the plagues, right? Turning the waters into wine. That is making water that's usable, unusable. Does that kind of sound maybe a little bit familiar? Taking waters that are usable, making them unusable. The very first thing that he does to the Egyptians. And then he brings various plagues upon them, various things that are destructive, that are hurtful. And it ends with the death of all the firstborn within the land of Egypt. And then when God, he delivers them across the Red Sea, but how does it end? It ends with a crazy destruction on the army as the waters come over top of it. And it says that the Egyptians were washing up on shore, dead. And they're looking and they're seeing, this is what God does. He's destructive. He is powerful. He's hurtful. He does all kinds of things to tear down and destroy. That's all that they've seen of God so far. So what's the very first thing that God does? He leads them to a place that's destroyed so that he can show them what? I'm also the God who heals. I'm not just the God that takes what is good and makes it bad. I'm also the God that takes what's bad and I make it good. And so the very first of these things that he does when he brings them out here is he reverses the first of the plagues. He reverses when God took good water and made it bad. Now he takes bad water and he makes it good. And he says to the people of Israel, look, if you will follow my statutes, if you will do what I'm commanding you, if you would be the people that you were created to be, I am your healer. I'm the one who will take care of you. I will provide for you. You don't have to live in fear like those Egyptians. I, the Lord, am your healer. You see, as the text clearly points out, and I keep calling these testing narratives, I didn't make that term up. It's in the text itself. He tested them. This was a test. He is testing them here. And oftentimes in scriptures, when it talks about God testing, it's not always this idea of, God saying, I wonder how they're going to react. Or I have a feeling that he does this so that the people can see how they will react. He puts people in a situation so that they can know what it is that's in their hearts. God brings them to a place so he can show them this is how you respond when things happen. And it comes out when they face adversity. Folks, they're going to miserably fail this test. And another one. And another one. And they're going to keep on failing. See, they'd put all their hope, they'd put all their trust in the waters. They saw the waters from a distance and they thought, we're saved. Yay, it's been 3 days, right? You know how long you can go, generally speaking, without water? About 3 days. I don't know, if there's something to that. Obviously they had water, I think rations and things like that, but I think there's something significant. They go 3 days with nothing. Finally, here it is, water. That's where their trust was. That's where their faith was. And when that turned out to be false, when that turned out to be bad, when the waters failed them and they failed the test, they cry out immediately. And through this test, God shows them very clearly what's in their hearts and what would continue to be in their hearts. And we're going to see over the next few weeks that, this was God putting them to the test. Even so, as you continue on in Exodus chapter 15, starting verse 27, then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water, 70 date palms. They camped there beside the waters. And they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The sons of Israel said to them, "Oh, would that we just died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." See, this wasn't just God putting them to the test. What we're going to see is this was their putting God to the test as well. A phrase that is used just as frequently. After God makes the waters sweet, makes them usable there at Marah, they move on to this place called Elim. At Elim, there's 12 springs. There's plenty of water there for them. There's 70 date palms. I'm not sure what the significance of those numbers. Those are very significant numbers. I don't know anything other than the fact that there was enough. There's enough there for this whole group of people. The idea is this is a great place. And consider this for just a second. Couldn't God have just taken them straight here? Why did they have to go to Marah first? If you have Elim, which has 12 springs of water, 70 date palms, it has enough for all the people, so when they get there, they don't cry out to God. They get there, and everything seems to be fine. Then why didn't God just take them there to begin with? How many of y'all, when you traveled, and you think about the places that you want to stop, I'm about to say a place name, and I apologize if I butcher the name of it. I meant to ask first somebody to verify, and I failed to. So just go with me on this. But if you were traveling down the gorge, all right, and you were thinking of places to stop, how many of y'all would choose this place right here, which is just a little bit west of Mosier? Is that how you say it? Mosier? Mosier? Mosier, okay. How many of y'all would choose this place just a little bit west of Mosier? Anybody? Anybody, is this the first place that you would say, hey, let's try this first and see what happens? I'm going to venture to guess probably not many hands are going to go up. Because you know that even though it has the shape of something that should provide, it's not going to. There are a whole lot of better options for you to choose than this place right here, right? Well, that's basically what God does to his people. You know, there are all kinds of great options. Elim is right there. It's on the table. They can come to there, but instead he brings them to this place. Instead of going to an exit with a whole lot of stuff, he says, you know what, let's go here first. Why? Why does he do that? Well, obviously, there's a reason. Because God wanted to make a point to them by saying, I am your healer. And after he makes that point, after they see that God is their healer, after he has demonstrated to them instead, now, if you will keep my laws, you will keep my statutes, you will be obedient, I am your healer. After he said that, he said, okay, now let's go ahead and go to Elim. Let's go ahead and head over here to this place. Elim seems pretty good as far as camps go. Plenty of water, there's some food there, it's a good place. It's much better than Marah, which means bitter, right? It's a much better place to stop. And it seems good enough that the children of Israel, I think they start to get a little content being here. Because what happens as soon as God says, all right, it's time to leave, guys. Let's pack up and let's move. As soon as they leave Elim, the whole congregation grumbled against Moses and Aaron. There it is, that word again, right? The whole congregation grumbled. Again, perhaps should be one of the first words that comes to mind when you think of the Exodus generation. Failure is also a good one. I think I would accept that one. But grumbled. It's just word association. And with another Exodus generation tendency, what is it that they long for? They say, oh, if only we died. Where? In the land of Egypt. If only we died back there. If only God hadn't come in and brought us out with his miraculous hand and brought us into this wilderness to die out here. We were perfectly fine back there. We had pots to eat from. We had water galore. Why did God mess with us and bring us out here? This doesn't make any sense. If only we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt. And by the way, what are they saying? Dying by the Lord's hand? If only we'd been part of those that had been plagued. If only we'd gone through the plagues ourselves and died by the Lord's hand there. That'd be better, because at least we had food to eat. At least we had water to drink. Very clearly, they are very singularly focused on food, their hunger. We're going to talk more about this next week. But they don't have enough. In this moment, they're longing for the days that they did. And, you know, there's something to be said about those folks who pine for the good old days, those golden years. People often, when they talk about the good old days, the problem is that they often simply forget the bad parts of it and how bad things really were. Think about this. People, when they focus on the negative, when you look back longingly and you focus only on the positive of what was, what causes that? The cause is focusing only on the negative of what is. When you only focus on the negative of what is now, that makes you long for the time before when your memory tricks you into thinking that all of that negative wasn't a part of what it was before. It was all good. People forget just how bad the bad was. They look back, they only focus on the positive, and it's not a good situation. We discussed this a while back when we looked at the power of prayer, Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. And in that, we talked about how Paul tells them to focus on what's true, what's right, what's honorable, what's of good repute. Remember all of that there in Philippians 4 and verse 8. It can make a huge change in a person's life if instead of longing for a bad memory of what was good back in times before, which, by the way, usually it's a bad memory, isn't it? I mean, oftentimes, I don't know, for whatever reason, people think of the good old days as the days before air conditioning. That alone right there just makes me wonder about that pining for those kinds of days. But that's kind of the idea. You forget the bad things, the negative of before, because you're so focused on the negative of today. We can choose to find what's positive today. We can choose to look at everything and say, you know what? Yeah, there's some negative, but I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus and find the positive that I can focus on. I'm going to look for what's good right now. That's what I think the idea when Paul talks about, it tells Titus, look for an elder who loves what is good, one who focuses on good things, focuses on the positive things. When he sees a person, there's going to be good and bad every single time. Someone who would be a good man for an elder is someone who says, you know what, this is the good in you. Let's nurture that and bring that out, and not just simply looking for what's wrong in order to correct it and beat it down. That's the difference. And this generation of Israelites, they just don't get it. They were content, they were fine, they were happy as long as they had these things. But as soon as they were put into a different scenario, things change, and they grumbled. Their problem is they couldn't look past today to see what was coming tomorrow. Consider the land that God is taking them to. Is it better than Elim? Maybe a little bit. I mean, they had enough. They had plenty of springs. There was food there. And God says, hey, come on. It's time to go off. We're going to head to a better land. And they're saying, great, thanks a lot. You pulled us away from this really good place. And God's like, yeah, but the place we're going, it's going to be fantastic. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. And they're like, yeah, but now we're in this wilderness. Thanks a lot, God. What are we going to do? We've got no food. And they grumble. I think this text is written in such a way to give us the impression they would have been perfectly happy to have stayed right there. They would have been just fine with it. It was okay, it was comfortable, it wasn't anywhere near the promised land itself, but to get to the promised land, they'd have to endure hardship, they'd have to go without, there were too many things, too many distractions, too many problems to get to that promised land. It's good enough just to sit here at Elim. They were fine. But once God moved them on closer to the promised land through difficult circumstances, they grumble and they complain. And ultimately, and I'm going to try to stress this as we go through these testing narratives, they never enter that promised land. They're just fine staying right here, and God says, I've got something better for you, and they never actually enter. And folks, there are some things that we can learn from this Exodus generation, just from this particular testing narrative at Marah. First of all, let me suggest we do not always know where God might be leading us. I mean, we don't know. And we don't know why God might be leading us somewhere. Folks, sometimes God does bring people to places of discomfort. Sometimes he does bring people to places where it's awkward, where it's not the best of circumstances. The bulletin article today some tangentially, it kind of fits in with this idea that just because a person is serving God, just like the psalmist Asaph in Psalm 73, that does not mean that God's going to make their life simply hunky-dory and perfect for them. In fact, they may look at all the rest of the world that's a bunch of sinful people, and life seems to be hunky-dory and perfect for them. Yeah, sometimes that's the way that it is. And whereas we might not fully understand what's going on, we might be inclined to start grumbling and complaining. We might need to realize, well, maybe there's something more to what we are experiencing. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. Does God bring every hardship into our lives that we go through? No. We can't have this attitude that says every single bad thing that happens to us, well, that's just simply the hand of God. It's not biblical to say that. There are things that happen that just simply happen because people have free will. But here's the thing. Sometimes he does. Sometimes he does bring his people, test his people, and bring them to places of hardship. And when God brings his people through places of hardship, and he does, how many of y'all have been through places of hardship before? How many of y'all have made it through those places of hardship? God brings his people through those situations. So when God brings us through, perhaps if we're looking, we might just find an I am statement attached to them. What is God telling us through what we encounter? We might just be missing some very important practical lessons concerning what God does, and we miss them because we're simply looking at the bad, complaining, grumbling, never giving him credit for the bad so that we can see his awesome deliverance. Let me suggest as well, life is full of false expectations. Put your hope in God instead. Hear his voice. The Exodus generation was led to this oasis that seemed to be the answer for all of their problems. They went 3 days without water, and then there's a place, they see it from a distance, that has water. They knew it was the answer to their worries. Everything's going to be fine once we get there. And it wasn't. Their hope was in something that did not fulfill that hope. I hope you can see how practical this is for us. How often in our lives do we sit back and we think, if only this would happen, if only X, Y, or Z would take place. If only I could get this promotion that I'm wanting, and I'll finally have a little more headroom in my finances to get over the bump. If only I had this car to drive, because my jalopy over here keeps breaking down every other day. If I just had this, then I'd be happy. If only this relationship would work out. If only this thing would happen. Whatever the case is, we put so much hope in these various things, and we assume that if those are delivered, everything's going to be better. Well, I've heard people talk this way about churches before. What's wrong with this church? We're losing all of our young people. We're dying. We're having this problem. We're having that problem. We need to start changing what we do. We need to change this over here. If only we had an engaging preacher, maybe that would help everything, or whatever the case is. Do those things really turn things around? I mean, you can try them, and it's not going to really change anything in the long term. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not asking you to find an engaging preacher or something like that. Hold that one off for a while. But the rest of them, you can try them and see what happens. But in the long run, nothing ultimately is going to change. Those are all oases with bitter waters. Answers just don't come like that. This one thing happens and suddenly it changes. Every now and then some things might get better. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, there's no guarantee that promotion is going to make your life better. There's no guarantee that this new job is going to make or break you. There's no guarantee that getting more families in here is going to rejuvenate a church. There's no guarantee that an engaging preacher is going to suddenly turn things around. Again, don't need to test that one, but folks, there's only one guarantee. This is the guarantee. God knows more than we do. That's the only guarantee that we have. That's the guarantee of the book of Job, which, if you want to talk about the idea of God causing hardship on someone and sending them to a place, and by the way, yes, 42:10, the narrator says that God brought these hardships upon Job. That's the way that we read it. That's the way that we understand it. That's what happens. God brought him to all of this for what purpose? It's a demonstration. Job, you don't know everything. Job's friends, you don't know everything. In fact, when it comes to what God knows, I can't even give you the sliver that we know compared to what God knows. We need to be very careful when we start making assumptions about what will or will not work, what will or will not help. Our trust needs to be in God, and in God fully, wholly, completely, and not in this situation or that situation that we think are going to change things. You know, a man who probably reached the point that he was hoping to reach, and we know now everything collapsed around him. I've used this quotation before. I'm going to use it again. This won't be the last time I use it because it is so poignant. The loneliest moment in life is when you have just experienced that which you thought would deliver the ultimate, and it has let you down. Ravi Zacharias, a name that just a few years ago would have been a great name to attach to a quotation, a name that now we know is a horrible name to attach to a quotation after all the scandals and everything that's come out posthumously for him. I think he understood this point. He had it all. He got to the top. He was one of the greatest apologetics individuals there was. He was at the apex of everything, and his life was a complete wreck and a mess. He got there. He experienced this. When that's where the hope is put, you get there and it lets you down. The wording is so true, it's lonely, because you've only been trusting in yourself. You're only there by yourself. You're not trusting in God. You're trusting in what this would do for you, what this would do for you, and you are left unfulfilled. Instead of focusing on life, you know, if I get this job, this promotion, this thing, well, instead, let's focus on the life that says, if this is what God wants me to do, then this is what I will do. Again, this picture here, no matter how good it gets, folks, this life is not perfect. Elim was pretty good, but it wasn't God's idea of good. It was okay for the moment, but it was in God's mind just a step in the path on the way there. It's not the final destination. But for someone who simply always lives in the moment, every moment is the final destination. Have you ever known that person that everything that has happened to them was the most important thing in the world? You know, all about the drama. Folks, if you're honest with yourself, as much as you try to say, you know, I hate drama, I don't want to be with drama, we all are this way, aren't we? This thing we're going through, this moment we're experiencing, this bad thing, this thing, whatever it is, that is so important, and it takes all my day, and I talk to people about it, and all of this, 10 years down the road is going to be completely forgotten. I mean, you would need somebody to remind you of it. That's kind of the way that life is. Instead, let's find the right things to put our hope and our trust in. So what happens when you get that job? What happens when you get that promotion? What happens when you get that car? What happens? Let's just say that those things we talked about, all those things come about. And your life gets better. And you start feeling good. But is feeling good always good? Don't we need every once in a while a reminder that this life just is not perfect when it comes right down to it? You know, I don't want to negate the point earlier about not complaining, but even though this life might be good enough, even if it was good enough to live without complaining, folks, it's still not good enough to put our final hope in. The wealthy are comfortable. And when they're comfortable, tell them about heaven, they might think, well, you know, that sounds nice, but I'm not bad off right now. Again, look at the bulletin article. Take some time and see this problem. That's why some of the wisest words in the Bible come from, in the Proverbs, from Agur. It says, give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is my portion, that I not be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or that I not be in want and steal and profane the name of my God. He says, you know what? Don't make me fantastically wealthy, because then I would no longer put my trust in you. But don't put me so far on the other end that I might be tempted to profane my God. Put me in this position where I still am uncomfortable enough that I know my trust is in the Lord. It's possible for us to find our Elims in this life, the places of comfort, the places of contentment, especially in this land in which the poorest of the people are historically, in the grand scheme of things, some of the wealthiest people who have ever lived. It's possible to get so comfortable we don't feel the need for God any longer. That maybe someday we might give him all of our lives, but that's just not necessary in the moment. Remember, Jesus said that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into heaven. I think this is exactly why. We would miss out on the greatest possible destination because we simply settled here, making this good enough in a way that this ruins the rest of the journey and keeps us from the promised land of heaven that's before us. Because at some point, you're going to leave Elim. We all are. Someday, this place where you feel comfortable and content, it's going to go away. It's going to wither. It might even fall down all around you, or it might gently go, whatever the case. It might even be simply with your death. Remember, people often don't want to die because this life is too good, right? Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die, that old phrase. But leave it we will. And if our trust is in Elim and not God, then we'll be in for a place of grumbling and complaining in the moment instead of trusting God for that final destination. And finally, folks, we have a healer. I hope we understand that point. Jesus, God in the flesh, the great physician who hung on that healing tree. I hope you saw this as we read through this. Remember, all of this written is for our understanding, we who need to be healed from sin. And it is God who cleanses us through his Son, Jesus, God in the flesh. Because not only was there a tree that healed there at Marah in the day of Moses, but there is another tree. Nearly 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years after the time of Moses, that was used to be the healing agent for the world. Jesus hung on that tree. And it was the blood of Jesus, the blood that was sacrificed. It was the sacrifice of Jesus that brought about the healing that was necessary. God not only can and does come in judgment, and rightfully so, but folks, God is also the healer. And it's not that we put our trust in him to heal us of our physical problems, which he may or he may not. That's not the promise that has been given. The promise is that he heals us from the deadly effects of the greatest disease that has ever been known to man, namely sin. God is our healer. Let's pray together. Dear God, our Father, we come to you thanking you for healing us, for making us whole again. Help us to be satisfied, content in our lives, but not so much that we rely on ourselves and not you. We thank you for the healing power of your Son, and it's in his name we pray. Amen.